Good morning and welcome back. So this is our second community class of the year. So apologies for being away for a bit. I've had a bit of a bug. So yeah, it's clinging on. So if I suddenly start coughing, I do apologise. But fingers crossed, I should be all right. So hopefully you can hear me all right and see me all right. So if you want to let me see your name in the comments, there's a link in the description that's going to let that happen. If you've already enabled it, you should still come through regardless. But I will wait for a few people to join. But as a kind of quick oversight, what we're doing today, we're doing colourful watercolour. So you won't see a bit of black in this project. The idea being that I'm going to show you a few tips and tricks for using stamps with your scanning cup. We'll see how we go. So I don't have massively long planned today, so I'm looking at probably about half an hour. Good morning, Linda, and I hope you are well. So we are going to be using some woodland theme stamps, but any kind of little critters, little landscape scenes are going to work for this technique. Okay, don't have to be massive, but what I will say is just to avoid using the really, really small stamps. They're just going to make it a bit too hard for your machine, a bit too hard for you to colour. You're going to need some watercolour paper, so I'm working on some £90 or 190 GSM watercolour paper. Smoother the better in terms of your stamping. Morning, Michelle. Thank you for joining us. Oh, you got your floor fitting today. Yay. So, I also have to one side bamboo cloth, and then let's talk about paints. So I'm going to be using Derwent Inktense set 2. So this is the really bright colourful one. Okay. So hopefully we should get a good range of colours in there. I've been stamping with archival inks. So what I will say, in terms of stamping with your inks, you're going to probably do 2 or 3 impressions. So it's really important that you have an accurate stamp platform to help you do that, just because of the texture of the watercolour. If you're working onto smooth stock, you'll probably find that you can do it first time easily, but just because there's that texture, we want to do a couple of extra impressions. And to help you out, use a little stamp tool to help you really get some welly behind those stamps, especially whenever we're stamping on anything with texture. So my little Inktense set comes with a little water brush, so I've already assembled that and filled it, and I do have a spare pot of water sitting to one side to help me clean my brush. Now, all the stamps that I've stamped so far, I've left in my stamp platform in their same position. So if you want to craft along, then you can do. Just remember to just leave those stamps there in case we decide that we want to reintroduce some of those kind of details, outlines. So you can do a technique where you could do it all with no line colouring, so where we stamp with a fairly pale ink and then put your black over the top at the end, but I don't want to go black. So hence we're going colourful. So let's open my ink palette, and you're going to see I don't keep it very clean. Don't waste anything because it'll all reactivate in the palette. Okay, now I just want to get my brush started, so just make sure it's done nice and tight. We're just going to give it a gentle squeeze, and if we brush it on our hand or our finger, we're going to feel when that water starts to come through. As soon as you feel that water starting to come through, stop squeezing, keep going, and see if that's enough. Maybe that it just needs one more little squeeze. So you want it damp, but you don't want it too wet that it's flooding, because otherwise it's so much harder to control. It's kind of getting there, a little bit more. Watch. I'll do this and then it will suddenly go. Okay. So, if we look at our stamped image, and I will bring this a bit closer to the camera just so that you can see actually, we're going to start off with our main image. Now, one of the first mistakes that people make in terms of stamping for their scanner cut is they put things either too close together or too close to an edge. So you want to make sure that there's a good finger's width around the edges, at least, if not more. So here you can see I've allowed more, but that's because I'm planning on extending this stamp slightly. Okay. You want to make sure that your edges, so the outside edges of your stamped image, are nice and clear. And then as we colour, we're going to kind of reinforce that clarity. Okay. So, if you are struggling to see your image, work with a copy of that image in front of you. Now, just for glare, let's take that out of its pocket so you can see that a little bit better. And if you want me to zoom in at any point, let me know. I can do that. There you go. Let's just do that little bit there. There we go. Just adjust that light slightly so you can see. There we go. So it's really easy to see where this mushroom is, and because you can see it really easily, I'm going to leave that to be one of the last things to do. Where you want to start is where things are a little bit more difficult to make out, so that you aren't making it even harder for yourself at a later point. So for example, this bit here is actually come out really quite pale, so that might be one of the first places that I'm going to do. So that's a little mushroom. So let's decide what colour we're going to go. So in our little image here, we've got it in blues and purples, and you can by all means follow that along, but I'm going to go, let's start off with a bit of purple. Instead of that being near the top, I'm going to put it down towards the bottom. There you go. And I told you it would squirt. So let's get a bit more ink in my brush. Now your ink tenses are really vibrant because they are essentially ink and not watercolour in the traditional sense. So I'm just going to gently blot my brush, and then let's go in here and we're going to kind of dot around this edge here. So you should have something that looks like a little bit of a curve. Then we're going to pull that up just a little bit. Okay. So we've got another of these little mushrooms down here. So I'm totally ignoring that top one for now, and we'll come back and do that after. So along that bottom edge first, then we're going to flick up towards that centre point. Okay. Now, just because there's a little bit too much water in that brush, I'm just going to add a little bit more of that pigment in on that bottom edge. Okay, so typically when I'm doing watercolour, what you'll find is I'll do this lovely job of blending in colours together. But for this one, because I want to emphasise that shape, I'm actually going to let that dry a little. And let's go. Okay, so we've got these little purpley flowers here. So they're not quite as strong. So I'm just going to kind of use a lighter version of that same purple because when we're painting we want to try and keep some kind of like colour consistency in there. Okay, and I'm just going to drop in a little bit darker colour into the centre of the flowers, so that way we can see which flower that petal relates to. Okay, let's just block that off a bit so that we get back to that lighter colour. And we've got another petal down here, and this one here as well. And again, pull up a little bit that darker purple and put it towards the centre. Now you notice I'm not being perfect about how I'm lining these up. So there's a darker little section in there. So let's just make that darker. And that's going to help our petals kind of pop up a little bit. Just going to blot that again. If you are starting to struggle to see where you're going, just keep comparing the two. So this bit here is those red berries. So if I put my finger there so I know it's not there, we've got that bit there. That is our purple petals. Okay. And again, just going to drop that in there. Now there's another colour in those centre of those flowers, so I will keep those centre areas clear of paint for now. Now, because the two colours that we're looking at possibly using, if we stick to what's on our image here, they are complementary. So that means they're opposite sides of the colour wheel, but it also means that if you happen to overlay them, what you're going to get is mud. So you want to try and keep them separate as possible. Okay, so we've got our purple there, and it's just if we want to put any purple into our butterflies out, I'm just going to do that next. So let's put in. I'm just going to do this on the tips of the wings. There we go. And use some of that wash that we did just to blend that out. And this one here, I want to bring that down there because we want to match this wing here. And then we've got this bit that's going to come sort of around there. There we go. And I'm just going to blend that out. Okay. So we have got a bit more of a darker colour in here. So I'm going to go and pick that purple up neat. There we go. And a little bit just in that gap there. So you should have something that now looks like that. So, given that we said that it's going to be colourful watercolour, let's pick our second colour. So, give your brush a quick rinse. Now what you can find is, if you have any paint kind of trapped in your bristles, give it a squeeze as well, and that will kind of flush it out from both ends. Especially when you're working with a darker colour like this purple, it's going to be more like it's going to try and hold on to that pigment. Okay, so I'm going to go to this lovely vibrant pink. So this is the fuchsia, and let's go first of all to our mushroom. Now, because these two are kind of in a similar location on the colour wheel, we can let them kind of overlap and mix and not worry too much. So we're trying to stay nice and loose and kind of fantasy-esque. So with this one, don't get too hung up about having it as proper colours, if that makes sense. Now, I'm going to bring that same colour through into our butterfly. Okay. I'm going to clean my brush off a little bit. So now there should be, next to no pigment, but there should be some water. And I'm just going to blend that right out. So we're keeping that butterfly nice and soft. Okay. So now, I don't want it to touch that purple. It's really quite important. So keep it nice and loose and figurative. Okay. Next, I'm going to go for the leaves. So work your busiest areas first, and then we can kind of move on from there. And yes, they have fab stamps, Linda. So they're from Orngry. And I'm just going to put some of that yellow into the green section of my palette, because I just want to get sort of like a nice limey colour. So the yellow in this palette is quite greeny tinged anyway. It's called Sherbet Lemon. But then when you add it to the greens, it's really easy to mix with the greens. It's a bit harder to mix it with the oranges, and what I tend to say is if you're going to do that, have set one to one hand and use the yellow at that instead. But for the greens, it's ideal. So let's bring in our colour. Now, I've stamped this image in Wild Honey archival ink. So that means that what we can actually do is we can actually pick up other colours that will match our ink as well to actually drop in. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of this orange, and if you remember what I said, if it's on the other side of the colour wheel, you're going to kind of get mud. But for your leaves, you actually kind of want that. Okay, so there's our first leaf done, and we can work our way through. So a bit of a clean. Let's go back to our green. So we're still doing this same kind of leaf section here. So we'll keep that same green, and again we can just pick up a little bit of the orange and just let that kind of feed through. That's going to give our leaf form. A little clean. A bit more of that green down the bottom. And I'm just going to drop in some orange down there so that we get the sense that this one is on the ground a little bit more. I'm just going to very gently put my tip through a lighter bit of that navy colour as well. And that's going to give us our shadow colour. So we want to try and help our leaves pop out. So if we go across the top edge of our leaf so that we're making our leaf pop out. So let's see if I can get that to pull up. Come on. There we go. So you want it on this top edge here. And you can make that as strong or as weak as you want it. So let's give that a quick wash. I'm going to bring in a bit more of that green into that lime, and we can do a different section of leaves. So let's do this one here, and we've got a few bits that are going to come along like this. We've got some more leaves down here, and this is where we're going to start getting a bit more loose, because if you can't see exactly where your lines are, then we can kind of get away with making it look a bit more out of focus by just dotting that colour in and then letting the lines that are there do kind of the work for us. Okay, another quick wash, and we want to go for a different green again. So I'm going to start off with this kind of browny colour. Seems really weird and kind of the wrong way to go about it, but for this one, because I want it to be radically different, I'm going to start with that brown. Then we're going to pick up our green, and we're just going to drop that in right on top. And that colour goes right to this point here. And going to take a slightly different green. So let's go to this bluey green and drop that in there. That can go in there like so. Drop that in there. So I need some red. Just going to blot that so it's not too wet. And we're going to be doing our berries. So think of berries as like a little U shape, because we want to keep a highlight like so. Let that dry for a bit though, because that's quite wet. Okay, so while that's drying, we've got some little stem bits here. So let's go to our bluey green, and we're going to start off with those. Now usually what I do is, if I wasn't going to be doing the scan and cut portion of this project, I'll do these a little bit paler to kind of push them back. But as I said before, when we're working with our scan and cut, we want to try and keep our contrast as strong as possible. So now I've done this stem here, and I'm going to go back and do the top part of our little bloom. I'm going to blot my brush, not clean it, just blot it, and I'm going to go into that lime green, start down the bottom. Now we're going to mix the two together. There we go. And let those colours intermingle. Okay, just notice there's a little bit missing there, but we can just use a water brush just to kind of touch that up. Okay, so if we're going to be cutting around this exactly, then you want all these light wispy bits in the background here to be really precise. Okay, I'm going to do something a bit different, because what I'm thinking is having a frame round here so that it actually cuts out the watercolour panel, and then have it do like an inner aperture so that I can pull that outer frame up, and then we can bring in some of the elements over here. Did somebody say that they're only going to do half an hour? Oh dear. So let's go back to our orange, and I'm going to drop this in underneath our mushroom. Blot, blot, blot. Little squeeze, and we're going to blend that out. So, as we start to get down towards the bottom, we can reintroduce that same colour, so we get the feeling the light hitting our stem here. Okay, so without cleaning the brush, we can move to our other mushroom, and because that doesn't really have much of a stem, I'm just going to leave that in its totally orange state, and we can actually start to do this one up here too. So let's get a strong orange underneath there, so it looks like it's actually hollow. And then if we leave a line at the bottom, we can just blend that out. And there we go. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave that to dry for a moment and we'll move to something else, because we want to keep our stem nice and sharp. So because I'm going to be doing that technique where I want kind of a softer outer edge, and then we're going to just cut a circle for that centre, then I can go a little bit more loose in terms of my painting. So just going to kind of get my brush in there. I'm just going to try and follow the direction of my little petals here. And what I would say is, if you're doing something like this and you're thinking, okay, that's lovely and all, but it's a bit flat, pick another colour. Sort of within the same kind of vicinity in the colour palette, but just pull it out in a few places and it will just give that a little bit more depth to your painting. Speaking of which, Lucy suggested that I do a class on Rebel, so that you can see that in and how that works. So I'm going to do my mushroom here the other way up, just because I can. So if you fancy doing some watercolour painting with me, because it is really realistic with watercolour painting, so even if you don't have Rebel, it's still applicable, then I'm going to be doing some watercolour painting. Rebel can also do acrylic and oils, which is really funky, because you can actually do a lot of mixed media work within it and not have to worry too much about the mess you're making, because you don't make any. So at the moment that's a good thing for me, because yeah, the studio still isn't there. So hey ho. There we go. What is Rebel? So it's new out. It's Rebel Pro 7 is the one that I have, and it's a natural media paint program. So it's not Photoshop. You're not going to take photos into it and be doing photo editing, at least in that sense anyway. It is literally more like working with proper watercolour or proper acrylic, and it can even do metallic paints. It's a fantastic piece of kit. It's a one-off payment. I was lucky enough to get it while it was on offer, and it was my Christmas present. So I've been kind of doing lots and lots of painting with it. So if you've seen any of the watercolour I've put up sort of this year, you can guarantee that is how I've done it. So this is actually quite unusual for me to sit with some actual watercolours now, and actually. So just to say what I'm doing as well, I've just swapped to kind of a navy colour, just to pull out these elements here. But yeah, I've been kind of obsessed with painting in Rebel instead. So somebody was asking me about one of my paintings I did yesterday, and they were like, "Oh, did you do that by hand?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, as much as if you were doing it this way." Just to have the added bonus of having that undo button. Okay, so there's a little leaf there that I've missed, so let's just pick up some of that green and we can put that leaf in there. Gonna go back to that ready colour and just do this little flower here, and then if there's one on the other side I'll do that too in that red, so that we're kind of mirroring. So let's go for this little kind of looping like one, and we're just going to dot that in. So then we've got red, 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 orange, 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 so that you're kind of always using a colour in more than one place. But I'll try and do a test and see how Rebel streams live. But if for any reason it doesn't like going live, then I'll pre-record. Just because I know that it does take quite a bit of processor. Because as you're painting, it's processing all the time the paint that you've already put down, the paint that you're applying, how much water is in your brush, because you can actually set that and how that's affecting, but also things like how absorbent your paper is. So if you set your absorbency to 0, for instance, you can make your watercolour act more like alcohol ink. With acrylics, you can actually have it so that it's a bit more like a dirty pour, and you get like your cells and things, which are really quite funky. So as I said, it's a bit addictive because it's like I can do all this messy stuff and not actually get messy. So I'm going to go back to that navy colour because we've introduced it over here. We need to use it somewhere else. So I'm just going to drop that into the body of my butterfly, which should now be fairly dry. And we can use the very point of our brush just to do those details. Now, if you don't feel like you have a steady enough hand to do these like tiny, tiny, tiny bits, then you can use a fine liner. And that's fine. So we've got our mushroom there. There's like a green bit in the back here, but let's go for a different green. So I'm going to take that navy that's in my brush and I'm going to mix it with that bluey green. And yeah, it's mushrooms. And by going that bluey shade, it should push it back into the background. There we go. Now there is actually another flower there that I just covered up, but that's okay. And I'm going to do the same here actually. Just put that bluey green in just to push everything back. Lucy, can you speak to your dad, please? Somebody forgot that I was going live. And there we go. Mind you, I did say I was going to try and do half an hour. So that's kind of my fault too. Okay, so we've coloured in our stamped image, and at this point it's Yeah, pretty soft. And what I would say is let this dry and then go back in and do some other areas and things a bit stronger so that you get a stronger contrast. So in particular, down in this section here, you want to kind of pull out that shading. So it's been a while since we did that area, so I can kind of show you what I mean. So I'm going to go and put our shadow in really quite strongly, like so. And that's going to help this leaf here kind of pull up. But I'm going to put shadow under here too. And one down here. And in our stamped image, if we look at the little guide that comes with it, we've got a shadow that's painted under there. So what I'm going to do is once this bit is dried a bit, then I will go through and do that. So I'm just going to add a bit more green, just because otherwise it's going to start looking a bit dark and a bit muddy, and I don't want that just for those bits. And I'm going to put a little bit in there. There's a little bit that needs some orange as well, just in this little almost nest-like section. It's not actually a nest, but and just by adding that little bit of darkness, we should start to bring out some of the detail. Now you can use that same navy to do the shading in our flowers too, but again, careful to not go over that yellow, because otherwise you're going to get green with the navy. And I want to try and keep it as yellow as possible. There we go. So while I remember it, let's just very quickly grab a little bit of that orange. I'm just going to pop that in there. Now where that orange mixes with that navy, we're going to get brown, but that's okay, that's what we need. And there we go. So the shadow colour is actually really interesting. It kind of uses sort of navy and teal mix as kind of a starting point. So I'm just going to really boldly blot that in. And it's got bits of lime, so we're going to put in some of that yellow and pop that under there and let that kind of mix too. And by keeping it nice and wet, things are going to mix nicely. Then I can go to my navy and I can go, right, okay, let's drop that right underneath these elements here. And we're going to follow it along our outline here. If we need to pull that back that way, like so. And then we've got our background. Now, because we're going to be doing this with the scan and cut, I'm just going to pull that out just a little bit further than my stamped image. And just drop in a bit more of that navy there, a bit of that navy there. Then we can pick up our lime, drop that in, and just let it blend out. Now, in terms of background for this section here, it is entirely up to you. We can leave it as is and hope that the scan and cut kind of picks up all of our sections. But what I would say is something like this where we've got lots of dots and lots of bits of outline that miss, we're going to really struggle to cut those out. So this is another issue when we're scanning things. You want to make sure that the scan and cut has a boundary to go to. So I'm going to go to this nice blue, and it's going to look really scary. Okay, don't get too scared. I'm going to pick up some of that bluey green, and then we're going to really pile in the water because we want it to be nice and pale. Paler the better. Now what I would say is use a spare bit on your stamp paper to actually check. So just draw out a line. Let's see if I can get it to pick up. There we go. Just to see just how strong that is. And you've got two choices. You can start dark at the top and get paler, so as if the sun is kind of setting down towards the horizon, or do it darker at the horizon and paler up towards the top, as in is more sort of like noon. I think just for what I want to do for this one, I'm going to start off with it up here. Now I'm going to give my brush a little squeeze as I'm doing this, and because I'm squeezing, it's going to be applying more and more water. Now that water is going to help that colour not only get paler as it moves down, but actually kind of flow and move. So let's get a little bit in here. So I'm not even trying to trace around the edges of things. It is literally just dotting it through, letting that water carry that colour into those areas by touching it and just pulling it through. Okay, so you should have something that looks like that. Now, if at this point you decide that you want to introduce other colours into that, you can do. But I think for this one, let's just add a touch of that tealy colour, and I'm just going to do some little drops. And again, we've kept this very, very wet on purpose so that our colour is going to blend through. So rather than it looking like random dots, we've got more of a kind of cloud thing going on. So if you need to flush out your brush just to blend things out, then just do a little drop into your palette, and that should be enough to clean rather than going through and having to clean everything. So what we're looking for is that when our paint dries, we've got a kind of definitive line-ish, but you want it so that you can see an optical contrast, if that makes sense. So with this top edge, just want to try and make it look a bit more random. So let's put in a bit more like that. And just because it started to dry a bit at this top, I'm just going to kind of tap that out. Now, before we go and put that anywhere near our machine, it does need to dry. So I think this is going to end up being a two-parter, I do. Let's just very quickly, we've got some little characters here, and I'm just going to very quickly rough these out. We'll see if it dries quick enough. If not, I'll do it in two parts. It's fine. Because if your paper has any moisture left in it and you try and cut it, you're not going to get a nice clean cut. So I've used the brown, which is red oxide, and the bright orange on my little hedgehog here. Now, you're going to see when I do this, I kind of put my dark colour just inside the outline of my hedgehog. And that's because we want to kind of show that the light that we've kind of got down here in our image is actually behind our little hedgehog. And it may be that we don't see those bits, but we've if we've done it, then, you know, job done. Don't have to worry about it. I'm going to come back in with some more of that red oxide and do his lip feet. Okay, now while that's still fairly wet, let's get our shadow colour. I'm just going to drop that through because I want it to look like little feet in shade, because they, you know, obviously he's over the top of them. And I'm going to blend that out. Now with something like this where we've got our shadow, make it bigger than what you actually need it. The reason I say that is if we're trying to stick it inside an aperture, if it's bigger, then when it does the scan, then it's going to give you enough for a glue tab. Your other option is that you take it into canvas and then you're faffing around putting glue tabs in. So let your watercolour do the hard work. Let's pick up that teal blue and we're going to drop this into our little dragonfly. So let's pick up some of the yellow, and yes, that yellow is now green because I didn't clean my brush first, and that is fine. Back to our tealy colour, and again this would come out darker again because we haven't cleaned our brush. But if we go underneath, and then we can do a little trace for the legs. There we go. And then we can just drop a little bit more of that colour in the tips of the wings. Okay, so I have done a little frog as well. The frog's a bit more difficult to see, even for me. And he's upside down, bless him. So let's make him a little bit easier to see. So I'm going to do the colour his body first, and a little bit up around the eyes, and then we can just pick out some colours and we can just drop that in. We can let that kind of blend like so. If you think he's too dark, we can blot our brush and pick some of that colour up. There we go. And we can do his little feet. Do frogs have feet? They're kind of webbed, aren't they? Okay, and back up the other way for my butterfly. So I'm just going to use some of that green that's left on my brush. Same here. See those elements. Now we want to reference back to our image to choose our colours. So we've got these oranges and these purples, so you want to have kind of those represented in your two butterflies. So I think the bigger one, let's make that the purple. So that our butterflies are stamped in kind of a paler green, just to kind of give it that feeling of being insecty and kind of translucent. And I'm going to go to an orange one for this one down here. Okay, there we go. And again, when we're being kind of loose with our watercolour, it's the edges that are important. So as long as those kind of all join up, we should be good to go. Very, very finally, let's get our little snail. because we use that red oxide in our little hedgehog, we need to use it somewhere else. So let's use it on a snail shell, so you get the feeling of those little spirals. And again, just go around the outside. There's my little snail. Do a little antenna, and there we go. So, as I said, what I'm going to do is actually split that into 2 classes and do the next bit on Scanning Cup once that's all dry. So, I'll do that Friday. Take care for now, and I'll see you Friday, same time, same place. And we'll finish this off. Just to go over everything that I've used. So it's the All and Create 1094 set of stamps. So worth having those to play with. I used archival ink in different colours for different sections. So whichever you think is the kind of dominant colour, that's the one you stamp with. I used the Inktense set 2 to do my palette. And some bamboo just to block my brush. And thank you, Linda, and look forward to seeing you on Friday. Bye for now.